David, thank you. Attorney General Josh Kaul urging state lawmakers to pass legislation setting a clear policy with regulations for data centers looking to build here in the state. This comes as local municipalities and counties debate passing ordinances and moratoriums that could impact proposed projects. Our chief political reporter Jason Zimmerman visiting with the AG this afternoon. He joins us live in studio. Jason?
Chris, I spoke with Kaul as he prepares to seek a third term as Attorney General this fall. A number of voters right now are concerned about data centers with major projects under construction in places like Beaver Dam, Mount Pleasant, and Port Washington. Others have been proposed facing pushback in northeast Wisconsin. Kaul says any legislation passed should include safeguards protecting people from paying more on their electric bills because data centers use so much energy. The state should also ensure environmental protections are in place and that high working standards are enforced so the data centers attract decent paying jobs. The issue has also come up in the governor's race. So I asked Kaul if he would commit to publicly releasing at some point a written DOJ policy for data center deals highlighting when his office could sue or intervene, no matter who's backing the proposal.
That's why I think legislation is so important, because really when it comes to data centers, we're in the Wild West right now. We don't have legislation on point, and at the department, we can only bring enforcement actions if there is a law that's being violated. So getting rules in place that then are going to apply consistently across the state would be a big step forward.
Right now, Wisconsin has approximately 47 to 53 operational data centers. 16 others are either in the planning stage or under construction. Chris, back to you.